presents a hero and a city with secrets hidden by the cloak of night. What's Done in the Dark, the audio drama.
Streetlights blurred, red streaks through Dominic's sightless eyes. Andre's luxury car ate up the asphalt, engine a low growl. The city smelled of rain and fear.
"Never thought I'd be here," Andre murmured. "Here?" Dominic questioned. "In my ride or on the right side?" "But mostly the right side," Andre answered.
They were headed to the south side. Ravenhurst's underbelly, a place where hope went to die. Dominic could feel the weight of it pressing down, a suffocating blanket. Dominic began, his voice hesitant. He was talking about the warehouse, about the bullet, about Andre's impossible healing.
"I know what you saw, what I am. You're like me, a healer, a freak," Dominic stated.
Andre laughed, a harsh, humorless sound.
"Yeah, guess we are alike."
He glanced at Dominic, a flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude, respect. "That's why you're doing this? Because of what we can do?" Dominic asked.
Rashad thinks he's got all the power. But there's more than one kind of power in this city. Time we showed him that.
The car slowed as they entered the south side. The air grew thick with despair. The scent of poverty and desperation clung to everything.
"One of my boys is here. He needs me," Andre exclaimed. "Who are these boys?" Dominic asked. "One of them, he's like us. Different, special. He can move like the wind," Andre answered.
Dominic frowned. What was Andre talking about? Who were these people?
"His name is Christian. He'll help us. He has to."
The car rolled to a stop. Dominic could hear shouting, the distinct clang of metal on metal. Trouble. The shouting grew louder as they stepped out of the car. A woman's voice, high and sharp with terror. A child's cry, thin and piercing. The heavy thud of fists against flesh. Dominic felt a tremor run through him. Not fear, anger. He hated this, the sound of suffering, the taste of injustice thick in the air.
"This way,"
Andre said, his voice a low growl. He moved with a surprising grace for such a large man. Purposeful, dangerous. Dominic followed, his senses stretching out, painting a picture of the scene unfolding before him, the heat of bodies packed close, the metallic tang of blood.
"Make way, coming through."
They pushed through a crowd of onlookers, their faces etched with a familiar blend of fear and resignation. They emerged into a small clearing, a tableau of brutality illuminated by flickering streetlights. 3 police officers, their badges glinting like predatory eyes, were shoving people against a brick wall. A young mother, her face streaked with tears, clutched a wailing child. An elderly man, his eyes filled with a lifetime of weariness, slumped on the ground, blood trickling from a split lip. Dominic's fists clenched. He could feel the rage building inside him, a white-hot wave threatening to break. These weren't peacekeepers, they were predators, preying on the weak, the helpless.
"Hold on, let's see what's going on."
Dominic fought to control his anger. He had to be smart. Rushing in blindly would help no one. He listened, his senses scanning the scene, trying to piece together what was happening.
Just trying to keep the peace. You people should be grateful we're here.
Grateful? Grateful for you harassing our families, terrorizing our children?
The officer laughed, a harsh, humorless sound.
You got something to say, boy? Why don't you step up and say it?
"Back off, Miller."
Andre stepped into the clearing, his presence commanding attention. Dominic moved with him, a silent shadow at his side. The officer Miller turned, his eyes widening with recognition.
Well, 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 look what we have here. The prodigal son returns.
Miller snarled, his gaze flickering between Andre and Dominic.
This ain't over. You can't hide forever.
And then all hell broke loose. Miller lunged, a meaty fist aimed at Andre's jaw, but Dominic was faster. He moved like a phantom, a whisper of darkness in the night. One moment he was beside Andre, the next he was standing behind Miller, a hand closing around the officer's wrist. Miller roared in surprise and pain. Dominic tightened his grip, his anger a living thing flowing through his arm. He could feel the bones grinding, the tendons screaming, but he didn't care. These men deserved to hurt. Miller bellowed, struggling against Dominic's impossible strength. He threw a wild backhand, aiming for Dominic's head. Dominic swayed out of the way, his blind eyes somehow anticipating the blow. He slammed his elbow into Miller's ribs, a sickening crunch echoing in the night. Andre moved like a panther unleashed, his massive frame surprisingly agile. He ducked under a wild swing from another officer, his fist connecting with the man's jaw with a sickening thud. The officer crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The third officer, a wiry man with panicked eyes, went for his gun, but Andre was on him before he could even clear the holster. He slammed his shoulder into the officer's chest, lifting him off his feet. The officer cried out as he slammed back first against the brick wall, the air knocked out of his lungs.
You want to terrorize innocent people? Come try me.
Andre stood over the fallen officer, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. Christian was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of limbs and fury. He danced around the fallen officers, his fists moving so fast they were almost invisible. A jab here, a kick there, each blow precise, calculated, and utterly devastating. One moment he was in front of an officer, the next he was behind him, a mocking whisper in his ear. The officers were completely disoriented, their training useless against such impossible speed.
He moved like the wind itself, an unstoppable force of nature.
Dominic, for all his enhanced senses, could barely track his movements. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of righteous fury. The tide had turned. The initial shock of the attack had worn off, and the crowd, emboldened by the trio's defiance, began to rally. They surged forward, a wave of humanity reclaiming their dignity. The officers, outnumbered and outmatched, were quickly overwhelmed. They stumbled back, their faces pale with fear, their bravado gone. The crowd pressed in, their anger palpable.
Dominic, Andre, and Christian stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front against injustice. They had drawn a line in the sand. The South Side would not be terrorized any longer.
As the last of the officers was subdued, a figure emerged from the crowd.
Well, damn, old man, you pack a punch.
Christian, his face split in a wide grin, clapped Andre on the shoulder.
Christian, this is Dominic.
Good to finally meet the man who's got Andre singing a different tune.
Christian, his chest still heaving from the exertion, extended a hand towards Dominic. His grin was infectious, a flash of white teeth against his light brown skin.
You're fast. Never seen anyone move like that.
Dominic, still catching his breath, reached out and shook Christian's hand. His grip was firm, calloused, a working man's hand.
What can I say? Gotta use my gifts. Speaking of gifts, when did you get so slow, old man? Thought you could handle yourself.
Andre rolled his eyes, but Dominic could see the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips.
Funny, you're one to talk, pretty boy. Last I heard, you were running from your own shadow.
The air crackled with their banter, a familiar rhythm masking the tension that still hung heavy in the air. The crowd, their anger spent, had begun to disperse, their voices hushed whispers against the backdrop of the night. The sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful sound that spoke of a city teetering on the edge. Dominic, despite the humor playing out before him, couldn't shake the weight of what had just transpired. The violence, the fear, the desperation, it was a darkness that clung to the South Side like a shroud. He knew with a certainty that sat heavy in his gut that this was only the beginning. As if reading his thoughts, Andre turned to him, his expression somber.
This is what we're up against. This is why we have to fight.
Dominic nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. He didn't need words to understand the weight of Andre's statement. He could feel it in the air, in the silence that had descended upon them. The fight had been won for now, but the war was far from over.
We're with you, whatever it takes.
Christian, his earlier playfulness gone, placed a hand on Andre's shoulder. Their eyes met, a silent vow passing between them. Three men bound by circumstance and a shared purpose, standing on the precipice of a storm. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights painting the buildings in an eerie glow. It was time to go. They couldn't afford to be caught, not now, not when they were just beginning to understand the true scope of their mission.
Come on, we've got work to do.
He turned and walked away, his broad back a symbol of strength and determination. Christian, after a moment's hesitation, followed. Dominic, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the pavement, fell into step beside him. As they melted into the shadows, the city held its breath, waiting. The fight for Ravenhurst had just begun, and in the heart of the darkness, a promise had been made, a promise of justice, a promise of hope. The night was young, and they were just getting started. Silence descended as abruptly as the fight had begun. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving a hollow echo in their wake. Christian, ever the restless one, paced a small circle, his sneakers scraping against the asphalt. Andre leaned against the car, his chest heaving, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the streetlights.
You all right, old man?
He stopped pacing, his eyes flitting to the dark stain blooming on Andre's shirt.
Just a scratch. He got me good, though. Haven't felt a hit like that in a while.
Dominic, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in Andre's breathing, knew it was more than just a scratch. He could feel the throb of pain emanating from Andre, the insistent pull of his healing abilities struggling to knit flesh and bone back together.
Let me...
He could take the pain away, ease the burden of Andre's healing. It was the least he could do after the display of raw power he'd just witnessed.
Don't waste your strength on me. I'm used to it.
Andre waved him off, his smile turning brittle. He pulled his hand away, revealing a jagged gash just below his ribs. Blood welled up, staining his shirt a deeper shade of crimson. Dominic winced, the familiar sting of phantom pain ghosting across his own skin. He knew that pain, the searing, white-hot agony that ripped through you like a lightning strike. You shouldn't have to be. Dominic's voice was soft but firm. He'd seen enough pain, enough suffering to last a lifetime. He wouldn't stand by and watch someone else endure it, not when he could do something to help. Andre hesitated, his eyes meeting Dominic's. For a moment, Dominic saw a flicker of vulnerability in their depths, a glimpse of the fear and uncertainty that lurked beneath Andre's carefully constructed facade of strength. Then just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of stoicism. Andre shook his head, a sigh escaping his lips.
It's fine, really, I'm good.
All right, lovebirds. Save it for the honeymoon. We gotta get out of here before the cavalry arrives.
Christian, sensing the unspoken conversation passing between them, cleared his throat. His words, though light-hearted, broke the tension that had settled over them. Andre chuckled, a low rumble that morphed into a cough as the pain lanced through him. He swayed slightly, and Christian was instantly at his side, his arm a steadying presence around Andre's waist.
Easy there, big guy. Don't want you crumbling before we've even started.
Andre leaned into Christian's touch, his earlier bravado forgotten. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way that Dominic hadn't thought possible. The fight had taken its toll, leaving behind more than just physical wounds. Dominic watched them, a strange sense of kinship welling up inside him. They were different, these two, but bound by a shared history, a shared purpose that transcended their differences. They were brothers in arms, forged in the crucible of battle, their bonds tempered by pain and sacrifice, and in that moment Dominic knew he would do whatever it took to protect them. They were his allies, his comrades, his friends, and they were just getting started. Car horns blared in the distance, a discordant symphony of urban frustration. The smell of exhaust fumes hung heavy in the air, a metallic tang that spoke of the city's struggle to breathe. Above them, the sky was a bruised purple, the last vestiges of daylight clinging to the horizon. Dominic leaned back against the cool brick of a nearby building, his senses on high alert. He couldn't see the city lights, the flickering neon signs, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness, but he could feel them. A pulsing, throbbing energy that mirrored the chaotic rhythm of his own heart. He could feel the city holding its breath, caught between the remnants of the day and the encroaching shadows of the night. It was a city on edge, teetering between hope and despair, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. Beside him, André shifted restlessly, his breathing shallow and uneven. The fight had taken more out of him than he let on. Christian, ever vigilant, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his hand hovering near the knife sheathed at his hip. "We need to get him somewhere safe." Dominic's voice was low and urgent. André needed time to heal, time to recover from the wounds both visible and unseen.
I know a place. It's not much, but it'll do for now.
Christian led them down a maze of narrow alleyways, his steps sure and silent. Dominic, guided by Christian's voice and his own heightened senses, followed close behind. André leaned heavily on Christian, his footsteps dragging on the pavement. As they walked, Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The city, for all its chaos and indifference, felt strangely aware of their presence. It was as if the very shadows themselves were closing in, whispering secrets on the wind. They emerged into a small, trash-strewn courtyard, hidden from view by the towering brick walls of surrounding buildings. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light over the scene, illuminating the graffiti-covered walls and the rusted fire escape that clung precariously to the side of the building. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary of sorts, a place hidden from the prying eyes of the city, where they could regroup, recover, and prepare for the battles to come. For they all knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that this was just the beginning. The fight for Ravenhurst had just begun, and they were committed to seeing it through, even if it meant embracing the shadows. The fate of the city, they realized, rested on their shoulders, a burden both heavy and exhilarating. As dawn painted the sky with hues of hope and promise, they stood together, three unlikely allies bound by destiny and a shared purpose. The shadows might have embraced them, but they would not be consumed by the darkness. They would fight for the light. They would fight for Ravenhurst.